and howl about America and democracy. There is no America. There is no democracy. We no longer live in a world of nations and ideologies. The world is a college of corporations, inexorably determined by the immutable bylaws of business. The world is a business. And I have chosen you to preach this evangel.
For all my free market healthcare robbing, stock stealing, retirement fund fucking with niggas. Fuck you little credit card scamming, jewelry stealing, crack selling, liquor store robbing motherfuckers. Shout to the homies, Carnegie, OG, Willie Randolph Hearst, Baruch, Rockefeller, the real Rockefeller, my main bitch Leona, pour out a little Louis XIII, Scott Rothstein, Jack Abramoff, hold your head, my shop niggas, let's get this money. I spend my day pepping America overseas, pension for the workers, nigga please, embezzlement, etiquette, private settlement, I'm better with Confederate rhetoric from my mansion in Connecticut, foreclose a big homes at the tenement, I twist words like a speech impediment, I hope you got good credit bitch, if not better get a new job with benefits, while I play golf with niggas and get cheddar with, new money buys brand new carrots, my old money bought your great grandparents, you got grills in your mouth, I ain't mad at ya, I own every gold mine in South Africa, thanks baby you made me a billion, plus I own a building for each one of my children's children.
And we are live. Welcome to Voice of Rebellion Radio. This is your host, Chris J. And tonight, here at UCY TV, we have a good show. It's going to be, we're talking about really a kind of loose concept here. And that concept is this term that's used over and over again by the media. I'm talking about the mainstream media, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, all these special interest controlled media outlets. And, you know, going a little bit off topic here, it's funny how you hear nothing in this campaign about media finance reform, these campaigns, the people that run for presidency. You don't hear them talk about this essential thing that we need in this country. And that's part of the reason why we're in the state we are in, is because the mainstream media has so many people deceived. And the money is coming straight from the special interest of the war special interest, your defensive subcontractors. You have even foreign nobility, foreign governments that our government protects that pay, for example, Bahrain gives money, I believe, to CNN that keeps silent about the Shia opposition and the Shia uprising in their country against this oppressive government that they have there in Bahrain, backed by the United States. You don't hear about, you only heard the protests in the Middle East that were convenient for the United States. You don't hear about the inconvenient protests, such as what was going on in Bahrain or the uprising, you know, in other countries. For example, Nigeria, which is not the Middle East, but it's another country where Shia uprising, similar to the one in Bahrain, and the kind of oppression that followed. This is examples of how the media keeps people silent. You know, these terrible crackdowns in Bahrain, Nigeria, and other countries that our media does not show. And they all, but in a lot of times they use a certain word, and I'll get to that in a little bit, that certain word, describe countries that they don't like Syria, Iran, and mainstream media was also literally the money coming also from these top billionaires, these other gigantic corporations, your foreign nobility, defensive subcontractors, and all that. In the end, the media represents everybody, it seems like, but the average person in the United States. And I think that there needs to be something that's addressed, this complete media. You know, this is not the case in every country. In a lot of countries, publicly funded media, at least there's at least one outlet, major outlet, that's funded by people. There's many different ways. You know, people often claim RT that have to be, you know, Russian propaganda or whatnot because it's state-owned. But in the end, they seem to be, what I see, way, way more factual on especially foreign policy and what's going on in the Middle East compared to what the United States is at with our media, having complete lies and reversals of the truth when it comes to Syria, with the situation in Syria, the situation uh, in Yemen that has been completely underreported and has been overshadowed. I mean, you saw at the presidential debates this complete fixation on these nonsensical issues. You know, talking about, I mean, how did they get to the point where they're talking about the Miss Universe pageant and Trump's Miss Universe pageants, but they never, not once, mentioned what the United States is doing to these Syrian civilians and these continuing escalations against the Syrian military that's going to lead to World War III, because Syria is such close allies as Iran, and Iran's not going to watch their ally fall to the United States imperialistic whims. Like what is going on right now is that they're trying to depose Assad, and this has been the plan for 10 years. And this is not the first time that Islamist uprising has happened in this country. But the last one happened before Bashar was in power. It was back in 1982 in the city of Hama. There was a huge Islamist uprising, and these people were connected to the Muslim Brotherhood. And this Muslim Brotherhood supports this uprising in Syria currently, as Mohammed Morsi was a big supporter of the so-called Syrian revolutionary. There's nothing more than a bunch of mercenaries paid by Western governments from Israel, the United States, from Bahrain to Qatar, Saudi Arabia to United Arab Emirates. As you see, we saw an example of the United Arab Emirates. You know, all we see on the surface is a flashy country, Dubai, and what seems to be a laid-back country in the standards of the Middle East. But we see them intervening with other countries' affairs and striking in Yemen. I believe they're part of the coalition in Yemen. And you see, there was a Houthi, the Houthis shot down actually one of the Emirates aircraft or something like that, and over there. So the Emirates are involved in there. They're involved in financing the opposition in Syria, the so-called moderate opposition that you hear all about the West does not exist. There's no moderate rebels inside of Syria. Well, there's a moderate opposition, I guess you could say, but they're in the parliament of Syria. They're not out fighting with using civilians as human shields, crucifying people, using chemical weapons, as has been alleged that they have done, cutting, actually eating the organs of a fallen soldier that they killed. You don't see those politicians in Damascus, the ones that are in the actual opposition, doing that because they're not terrorists. What you see, these rebels, these guys are terrorists. And the fact is that the Americans only call people terrorists when their media tells them to call them terrorists. That's a reversal. For example, they call those guys terrorists, but they call a group that has done a major part in kicking ISIS out of Syria, has done a major part in helping reestablish order in Syria and pushing towards a peace process, has been the voice of the oppressed and Palestinians in a way, and is also deterred Israeli influence of South Lebanon. They call these people, these ruthless terrorists, Hezbollah. But it seems like there's way more evidence that the Free Syrian Army should be designated a terror group. But the Hezbollah is designated a terror group by the United States. And they say this all over again. How many times? And how many times have you heard, especially at these like AIPAC meetings, talking about how they're going to counter Hezbollah? But Hezbollah, ultimately, in Lebanon, is just a political movement with an armed faction that in a way has more control of the country than their own military does. In keeping the order, and by keeping the order, not allowing the Israelis to influence it. The Israelis, however, they are these ones that you see the United States always kissing their ass at AIPAC. Remember that the Israelis have been caught on video trading Takafirs, which is just another word for ISIS. This whole ideology of Wahhabism is rooted in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and the United States are major allies, and just recently the United States just gave a huge amount of arms. The value was like in the hundreds of millions. And when the White House spokesman was pressured about it, he says, we have a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia, not specifying why we have a strong relationship with Saudi Arabia. Why do we have a strong relationship with these people that our own government are now admitting, practically, that they had ties to 9/11. But of course, they're only going to put out the small end of it. They were probably the third biggest player behind the United States and Israel. True, they had a part in 9/11, but they're still distorting the truth. They're making it seem like they were the masterminds. Is probably what they're kind of shifting the idea, because the old story is so bogus at this point that they're going to have to say, "Oh, this is what actually happened," but it's only just a small step closer to the truth. Because to say that they were the masterminds of it all is very is not possible, really, because you're still saying that the whole part of the Twin Towers falling the way they did, the Pentagon with no wings marks but just a hole in the Pentagon, saying that's where the plane went through, saying all that is still true. It's impossible, because that's what they're saying, is that they were the financiers of the hijackers. The truth is that there was no hijackers. There was a planned strike, controlled demolition. Those planes that went in there were most likely military planes, and the Pentagon was a missile. It's completely different from the official story. Not just the one, big detail left out. No, it's many, many, many big details leaving out. That's a completely different story, what actually happened there. Also, another thing that they've done with the mainstream media has tried to do, I've noticed, is that they try to connect Trump supporters to us people here in the alternative media and say that we are a big part of the Trump supporters. When most of the people in the alternative media, and the overwhelming majority, probably 90+% of the people in the alternative media, do not support either candidate. And I'd say a good portion of us don't support all four of them in general. Jill Stein, Gary Johnson, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton. We see voting generally, most of us in the alternative media, see voting to be a waste of time, and it's a rigged election, and the president is most likely selected at the Bilderberg Committee. From what evidence I've seen, is that it's selected at the Bilderberg Committee. The whole idea of voting, it goes back to the old saying from Mark Twain, that if it could actually change anything, they wouldn't let us do it. Mark Twain, he was a funny and smart guy, but he was ahead of his time for sure. For someone that was around, you're talking about the late 1800s, he was famous, and he saw a lot of what was to come, I think, in a way of what way the United States is going. And it happened just a few years after his death. The Federal Reserve was signed, where we got into a war that we had absolutely no part in. That was the first major thing. That was a signal that the United States was no longer the country it was 50 years prior or before that. Is that the fact is that the United States is now no longer a sovereign country at that point, because we were getting into Britain's war, France's war. Really, the war was ultimately Britain versus, and what I've seen is that it's possibly, even though the Russia and Britain were on the same side, is that ultimately the British and Russian monarchies really didn't like each other, and that it was more of a Britain versus the German and Russian monarchies that were a threat to the Western power. Ultimately, there was also other goals in the World War I, as well as dismantling the Ottoman Empire, paving the way for the moving of the East European Jews, or just European Jews in general, to this phony state of Israel, and Germany being weakened so it was no longer any kind of counter to the British Empire, even though at that point the British Empire was fading away and making way for the United States Empire, the United States imperialist empire. The rogue state is the term that's used a lot of times in the mainstream media to describe countries like Iran, Syria, North Korea, Cuba, Venezuela. Sometimes it's even applied to Russia. Sometimes it's applied also to Zimbabwe. It's been applied to Belarus, I'm pretty sure. But the thing is about these countries is, a rogue state would imply that this country doesn't have any allies. And all those countries I just listed have multiple allies. Also, rogue state, I guess you could say it's unpredictable. But generally, these countries have been very much predictable of what they've said they've done. Iran saying that they're going to back the Assad government at any cost, pretty much, and that they're going to fight terrorism. That's what they've done in Syria. Now, the United States, on the other hand, said they're going to fight terrorism. They're going to fight ISIS. They're going to back the moderate opposition. And they said as well that, at least for now, they're not going to interfere with the Assad government. What has actually happened is a very clear backing of Islamists in the country. What has also happened is that the Assad government has definitely been attacked in favor of the terrorists. And the moderate opposition has definitely not been defended because the moderate opposition does not exist. Now, the moderate opposition, I guess, would imply that the United States was helping out the parliamentary opposition to the Assad government. But what was happening is that the United States government was backing terrorists out on the street that were using using people as human shields, destroying cities, killing 4 journalists, as we've seen the press TV, whether it was intentional or not intentional. We've definitely seen cases of journalists ending up dead, and there was one that was from an Iranian journalist from Press TV was sniped on the head on live television. Now, I'm pretty sure that was the rebels who did that. These people are definitely not moderate in any way. These people have a truce with the Islamic State. These people as well have given weapons over to al-Nusra, which is pretty much just a different word for Al-Qaeda. And al-Nusra, to rebrand its image, changes its name to Jabhat al-Fatam Sham. And they, the United States government, seems to not acknowledge the fact that Al-Qaeda, al-Nusra are so closely tied together. They're fighting for the same objectives with the Free Syrian Army. So the United States is definitely doing different from what they said. Let's take another example. Another example right here is that they said they said that that they're going to work to find some kind of solution in the Israeli-Palestinian scenario, and that they're going to try to, but ultimately, they're going to try to make it more peaceful, and they're going to try to make some kind of long-standing agreement. But what has actually happened is that the Israeli-Palestinian situation has gotten worse, and the Palestinians have suffered even worse in recent years than probably before. The fact is, during the Obama administration, chemical weapons have been used against the Palestinian people. 2012, there were bombs in another operation. 2014, 2,000 innocent Palestinians. Well, 2,000 Palestinians were killed by the Israeli military. 80% of them were non-combatants. Only 20% of them were combatants. And I'll tell you one thing there's a major difference between an Israeli and a Palestinian combatant. An Israeli combatant is not defending his family from any immediate danger. He is defending a legal state that they have no territorial claim to it, other than this fake 1947 partition agreement, where land that was not given land that did not belong to one people was given to one people. While a Palestinian combatant, many of them, not all of them, some of them are exceptions and are terrorists, but the grand majority of these people that are combatants are shooting rockets off in revenge or to defend their families from the Israeli bombs, the Israeli soldiers' attacks on land that they do own, but have been practically held prisoner in, but are actually treated worse than a prisoner, because they're denied basic human necessities. Basic human supplies do not get to them. These Palestinians are not really, a lot of these combatants are not drove by the Hamas ideology or none of that. They're just drove by the fact is that they are in survival instinct. Now you see the grand difference. You see the major error in the statement. That's an equal thing. There is no war, really, in the Israeli-Palestinian scenario. What has happened is a genocide, a long-standing genocide, that has claimed possibly as many victims as the Holocaust. But the thing is that if you acknowledge that the Palestinian Holocaust is happening against these Palestinian civilians, they'll call you a racist and say that you do not like Jews. Now, let's apply their logic to one of the things that they hold so closely to their whole argument of their existence. And I talk about their existence, not the people, but their state, the Israeli state. Is that the Holocaust? With that same logic, the Germans, the Germans would feel they could when people were accusing them back in the 1940s of Holocaust, the murder of these Jews, then they could have said, "Oh, hey, look, this is not happening. This is right here. That's a complete lie made by people that hate Germans. These people are racist against Germans." But if you say that to them, use their own logic against them, so this continues at the anti-Semitic card, and you just bring up the argument and watch that. That's how you just completely short-circuit them. That's how you completely blow their minds. That, well, most Israelis aren't Semitic, while most Palestinians are Semitic. So actually, the bombing of these Palestinians is anti-Semitic. So really, the Israeli government are the anti-Semites. And, for many examples, even their leader, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, I believe his father, last name was Miliowski, doesn't really sound so Middle Eastern at all, for sure. And what does it sound like? Well, it sounds kind of Polish, doesn't it? Because, he's actually not from Poland, he's from Hungary. But what's the thing about that? Palestine is a Middle Eastern country that's currently occupied by Zionist forces, while Hungary is a European country. So ultimately, that's what many of these people are. They're European Jews that came down there, called themselves something different. Down there, Israelis that called themselves this thing, and notice they didn't call themselves Israelites. So that's a very distinguishing thing between the ancient Israel described in the Bible and the modern Israel state that has no claim to that land. It's the Palestinians' land. They were there for hundreds of years prior, and now they're being murdered, put behind a wall, and being denied basic human needs on their own land. These kind of horrors are happening inside of Palestine against these brave Palestinian people. This right there, and it's one of the worst things that's going on right now in this world. And the media completely ignores it. They don't ignore it. They show the situation and spin it to where Israel's the victim. Now, I'm going to say, the United States says that they continue to pump more money into these people, into the Zionists. And now they just agreed to the biggest aid deal ever. Why does this thriving Middle Eastern country need aid while our country, many of our cities are crumbling? Detroit, Chicago. And then we need to pay some attention to Chicago. Chicago has a major problem, and it's rooted partially on the lack of education money, the lack of programs for these youth. These troubled youth grow up in a gang culture, leading to what I heard something about that like 2,000 murders annually. If that's true, and I said I don't really have anything to back that up, but if that is true, that is 4 times higher than the cocaine period of murders in Miami. So they don't need the aid. We need to put some money in our own cities. On Detroit, people starving, people freezing, people starving, and in this rusted away former industrial city. Now, the United States government says that they're working their peace over there in the middle in Israel, but they keep pumping money into these war criminals. That is right there unpredictable, and that is more closer to a rogue state. Now, so we picked away two parts of it. Is that these countries that are rogue, supposedly rogue states, they do have allies. They're actually generally predictable, like I showed in the Iran scenario. And let's go to another one that's generally predictable. Is Russia. In this Ukrainian scenario that's been going on, they've been very predictable on what they've done in the Ukraine situation. Is that they said that they were going to take over the Crimea once they were there. They said that they were going to have the referendum. They voted and they were going to stay. They have not, like they kept to the word, moved into East Ukraine yet. And they have showed a lot of restraint, comparing that to the United States interference in the Ukraine situation and the fact that they're pumping money into these war criminals in West Ukraine. These war criminals that are pretty much put Adolf Hitler on a pedestal, and they definitely put Stepan Bandera on a pedestal, a Nazi collaborator. These people hate Russians. These people believe Russian should not be spoken in their country and persecute Russian speakers. And the Russians, it's not like this is a small ethnicity either in Ukraine. They are a very large ethnicity in the country. And in Crimea, they're 65% of them. So when Putin says that he is protecting the Russians in Ukraine, he has something legitimate about that. There's definitely a lot of Russians. There's definitely a major threat being against them. And now you're going to say, well, you don't have any real solid examples that show that there's a threat. How can we believe that? Well, let's look at a couple of examples. May 2nd, 2014, Odessa, Ukraine, which is not even that far east in Ukraine. This is more towards the center. But Odessa should definitely be one of the cities that becomes part of the East Ukrainian Free State once it's made, because of situations like this. The Azov Battalion, I believe, were part of which are pretty much like, these are unofficially part of the West Ukrainian military. They're ultimately, they say that they're just an independent group separate from the West Ukrainian military that supports the West Ukrainian cause. These people, Sieghel, these people carry around pictures of Adolf Hitler, believe Stepan Bandera is a national hero, and they came into West Ukraine, came into towards eastern Ukraine and Odessa, and they burnt down a building where pregnant women were inside, and many other people were inside. 40 people were killed in this massacre on May 2nd, 2014. And did you hear anything on the news? Not first. You didn't hear anything for a second. Now imagine, and just imagine, it won't happen, because the character of the people on the other side of this situation, Lugansk, Donetsk, People's Republic, let's say that one of those guys, let's say that the Donetsk People's Republic went over to went somewhere west, went to Kiev, or not even Kiev, just some West Ukrainian town or city, and they ended up killing 40 people in a similar fashion. So that's something on fire like that. It would be all over Western media for weeks. We didn't hear shit about that, I don't think. And there was probably some fluff story. I think that May 2014, I can't think of what was a fluff story around that time. Big fluff story last summer, remember the whole Caitlyn Jenner thing. Now it seems like the newest fluff story seems to be the Brad Angelina breakup or whatever. These things have absolutely no effect on the average American's life. These things that really, it's a distraction from what's going on in the real world, the Hollywood world. And they don't even know what the real truth about Hollywood is. That there's a lot of money coming from the State Department, or a lot of influence from the State Department and these government agencies that kind of regulate what's being put out by Hollywood. And at the same time, the Zionist influence inside of Hollywood. The West Ukraine scenario, though, the Russians have done what they've done so far. They have not crossed into Ukraine. They stayed in Crimea, and they would support only by non-military ways the East Ukrainian cause. They have been generally to their word. They're not unpredictable. They haven't launched any unannounced attacks. They haven't crossed over any borders that they weren't supposed to. But you know what? Is that the United States said that they're not going to escalate. They were saying how they don't want to escalate the situation. They don't want to stir anything up. But they're stirring stuff up, and I'll tell you what the kind of stuff they've done. Bringing their paratroopers to do exercises in West Ukraine. Keep giving money to Poroshenko's government. Well, Poroshenko is ultimately just a billionaire oligarch that has found his way to be a president after a coup. He's very similar to the oligarchs in Russia that put in fucking jail because these people were corrupt, vultures, profiteers off of chaos. The Poroshenko government is backed by the United States, and he's a murderer. He's a Nazi, or at least may not. Or he's definitely a supporter of Nazis. And you know what's funny about all this is that despite this government being a neo-Nazi government, and actually I would characterize Poroshenko as a Nazi, but is that despite this neo-Nazi government, who is the second biggest financer of the West Ukrainian regime? There's the United States, and there's a special country with an I. Oh, let's play a little game of we'll have like an in-game family feud or whatever. It's like, name a country that supports the West Ukrainian military. Okay, United States, number one answer. Okay, let's go to it. Okay, name a country that supports the West Ukrainian government. Israel. Oh wait, it's the number two answer because they're the number two financer of the West Ukrainian military. Now, why the hell are Israel, they're always bringing up the Holocaust, saying that their enemies are Nazis, are funny actual neo-Nazis? Because they don't give a shit about, what happens to regular Jewish people inside the country. And ultimately, is that the Svoboda party, they've made a truce with Israel after they've came to power. And even though that they used to spout out anti-Zionist rhetoric, they definitely turned after they became after they became into power. And now they are a pro-Israel party. The West Ukrainian military is pro-Israel. I've actually seen like a picture, I think, was the West Ukrainian flag, with two people holding flags, and one West Ukrainian flag, and side by side with the Israeli flag. This is also it's said that the Israelis give the West Ukrainians weapons. So, also, isn't that very unpredictable on Israel's part that they do practically everything opposite of what they say they are? They say they fight terrorism, they finance terrorism inside of Syria. They say they're against Nazis, but they help Nazis in West Ukraine. This is, now we're starting to get to a little thing. We're starting to uncover something that, wait a minute, these unpredictable countries don't seem to be Belarus, Russia, or any of those countries. It's starting to seem that the United States and Israel are many of the most unpredictable countries on the planet. It's very predictable if you know what's actually going on. But if you just went on what they say, it'd be very unpredictable. The United States military has also been pretty unpredictable in Syria, as we saw with the recent incident, September 17th. And also, they're kind of, even when they're caught red-handed, they're all dodgy about how, of course they're not gonna say the full truth. They said, "Oh, it was an accident." No, This country seems to have a lot of accidents overseas, don't they? Oh, it was an accident that we got caught with a cocaine plane. It's not what it looks like. It's not what it looks like that we were transferring cocaine. It was actually, it was an accident that looked like that. It was an accident we bombed those guys. It was an accident we killed the civilians. And then when you hear the tapes later, it's like, yeah, it was actually policy about about targeting civilian populations to induce fear and to take control of areas. Oh, yeah, about those guys. Yeah, those were the guys we intended to strike. Now, I wonder how they're going to market this to the Americans, if they ever do. And that's been a big question. It's something I can't even answer, and I can't predict. Is how, well, when the United States is eventually going to go into Syria, they're going to start fighting the Assad regime. Now, are they going to ever admit that they are fighting the Assad regime with ISIS? Or are they going to say that they're still fighting ISIS and at the same time fighting the Assad regime? Now, I wonder if they're going to use the media, and this would be a very frightening use of the media to subvert the people's minds into believing complete rubbish. If they can somehow spin, despite the years of us finding out these crimes of ISIS and what they've done in Syria and Iraq, if they can somehow spin ISIS into a United States ally, friends of the United States people, or something like that, and I've thought that is it possible? And the scary question, the scary answer that came to mind is it's very possible that the Americans could be, because they have such a short attention span. That's all the celebrity garbage that's being put in their mind, and all this other complete crap that they're worried about. They're worried about all their dumb social media accounts, all these narcissistic things from Instagram to all the stuff that they have no use, really, no practical use in life. It's not even about making friends or anything like that. A lot of these people are not using that. It's more to brag and show off to their friends and show how they're keeping up with the Jonases and how they got a nice car or whatever, a nice new car, or how they got a new haircut or whatever. But it's never trying to actually make any kind of legitimate change in the world or bonding a bigger sense of community. But, with that short attention spans and the fact that these Americans, a lot of them, are walking around aimlessly, going through life, not very aware of what's going on in the real world, is that they could probably change the story up and say that now ISIS is an American ally, and many Americans would accept it. It's a scary truth, but I think I'm not saying that it would happen if the media tried to spin the story, but I'm saying it's very much possible. And to believe that they can't distort reality that much in the Americans' minds is underestimating the power of the dark side of the media. And it's like, it's when you say, if you were to say, say that to Murdoch or something about how you believe that he can't totally spin stuff 180 from the truth and say, there's no way that you guys are going to be able to market ISIS as an ally to the Americans. You'll never be. It's not possible. And you hear him start saying with like a Darth Vader voice, you underestimate the power of the dark side. That's the dark side of the media. You underestimate the power of the media. They can make the oppressors look like the oppressed and the oppressed look like the oppressors. That's what Malcolm X had to say, and it's still very much true 50 years later, over 50 years after he died. It's still very much true. We are in a scary state with our media. Is one of the biggest problems with the United States today is the control of our media. Now, there's 15,000 media sources, and it looks like a bunch of variety, and this is with a lot of stuff, how consolidated the ownership of the United States is. People see all these different CEOs and owners and different people of these different companies and think, well, there's many people that it's much more decentralized. This is not we don't have these oligarchs that are controlling 5% of the entire country. Americans don't think that way. They think that, there's many different people that make up our market. But there is 15,000 different media sources in the United States. 6 control all 15,000. ultimately. That's the ultimate owners of these companies. 6 companies. So when you only have 6 companies to pick out of all the different media in this country, and they all have the same opinion, it's like, goes back to the line in the movie The Dictator, and saying about America, how they could be a dictatorship, or why don't they try dictatorship? You could have your media could appear free, but it could be secretly controlled by one person and his family. And that's how our media practically is. 6 people, ultimately, or 6 companies, control all the media in this country. And the same way with food and other things, that you see all these different brands, different foods there, but also like 6 companies control, or like 12 companies control like 90% of the food we eat in this country, which is absolutely remarkable that it's that consolidated down to that. It's so centralized, so consolidated that yes, there are these people like the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds not just pretty much own this country. They do own this country. I mean, they own our government, I guess you'd say. They don't own the people. They would like for us to be just their labor units, and that's it. They're labor units and nothing else. No individualism, no free thought, just that. But at this point, I would say that the people, they are becoming, a lot of them are acting like slaves. They are acting like they already have the chip in them. They are acting like they are already just a labor unit with no real individual thought whatsoever. They just go with whatever trend that's going on. And these trends, they just seem to get more and more ridiculous. So it just sounds like a better middle-aged man or something like that. Like idiocy of some of these trends that are coming up on the internet nowadays. There was the one with the make your lips look all swollen. There was the one with eating a bunch of cinnamon powder so you puke a bunch. That's what it's going to make you do. And that was just one that looks like just trying to sell coolers. It's like, I see these pictures, it was the Yeti budding trend, where these chicks, most of them in the pictures I saw were rather attractive and had, they had a rather nice second part to the Yeti budding, which is a butt to sit on the Yeti, and these chicks show off their ass while sitting on a Yeti. I guess it really just sounds like a way to sell coolers that are way overmarked. I mean, those things sell for $400, and what are they worth? They're probably made somewhere for, at the most, $40, maybe $20. Going back, the media has sold this idea of rogue states, these scary boogeyman states, and these scary dictators that we're supposed to be scared of. Lukashenko, Assad, Kim Jong-un is the one they scare us all the time with. And even North Korea, the one that you think out of that one doesn't have many allies. They do have Iran, a loose alliance with Russia, Belarus. They might not have very strong relationships with as many countries as the other ones. Russia's ridiculous because they're doing commerce with like 2/3 of the world and are a big part of the West. They do a giant amount of commerce with Western Europe. That's why the ideas of sanctioning Russia to the way that they've done is absolutely ridiculous, because it's going to hurt the people of the European people. It's going to be hurt very strongly if the gas is ever cut off, because they're reliant practically on Russian gas. I think something like 90% of their gas over there in Western Europe is Russian. And natural gas, that is. That is a big export from Russia. And also, regular oil is huge coming out of Russia. But yeah. The whole idea of the rogue state is like the idea of it's like the idea of the supervillain terrorist or the supervillain dictator that they scared us for many years with was Bin Laden and Saddam Hussein, and now it's evolved. Now they scare us with al-Baghdadi, and it's and the ironic thing about Saddam Hussein, Bin Laden, al-Baghdadi is that they all at one point or their entire careers worked with the United States, and al-Baghdadi has been accused of being an Israeli Mossad agent. That's their name, Shimon Elliott. And there's a few of them that, Mossad agents that pose as Muslims for different reasons. For example, like there's one that, you see this picture of a Muslim all the time. That's supposed to be, and this guy is like screaming, and this guy's not even a Muslim. He's an Israeli Mossad guy that has been shown so many times in the media to scare people of Muslims. And the media has went to extreme lengths recently to criticize the alternative media. When they make the alternative media, a lot of times when they showcase the alternative media, they have showcased the alt-right alternative, so-called alternative media. Breitbart has done a huge, massive service to us people in the alternative media. From Milo Yiannopoulos, with his outright discriminatory behavior. When I talk about that, is that he pretty much says he hates Islam. And anybody that pushes it to an extent. So you can't say, sure, he'll probably, and his followers would say, it's true, you can't say being anti-Muslim necessarily is being racist if you're against Muslims. But it's still being an asshole. Because the grand majority of Muslims are not terrorists, and the grand majority of Muslims that live in the Western world, in Britain, the United States, are not radical, they're not terrorists, or none of that. And the funny thing is that you'll never hear Breitbart ever mention the Zionist role in the terrorist uprising inside of Syria. You know why? Because Breitbart, in fact, Breitbart accuses our government of being anti-Israel. They accuse Obama of being anti-Israel. And they they say that we've been, or we're too soft of allies as Israel, is what they say. Breitbart. Breitbart they're shills. They bring potential critical thinkers and they bring them into this alt-right garbage. And fill their mind with, what ultimately is just an extreme version of Fox. It's like InfoWars has turned into seems to be another extreme version of Fox News. And you know what? Cenk Uygur, he's like an extreme version of MSNBC. The so-called alternative media these are not part of the alternative media. They're ultimately just extensions, controlled opposition, but they're still part of the same system, still part of the alternative media. Not the alternative media, they're part of the mainstream media. All alternative media wouldn't support Trump. Like Alex Jones became a Trump supporter. Breitbart, they're big-time Trump supporters. Alex Jones is soft on Israel, to say the least. Every time that anyone brings it seems like when people start alleging about about the Zionist role, and that it's not just, Zionism is just not a problem to the Israeli-Palestinian situation. It's not just a problem to the Middle East. It's a worldwide problem, with the Mossad committing assassinations, false flags, all across the planet. And this is not some far-fetched theory. President Hugo Chavez of Venezuela used to talk about the Mossad being in the Caribbean, financing the Venezuelan opposition to try to assassinate him. So they meddle in the affairs of a sovereign country all the way in South America. They were present at 9/11 in the Mossad vans. One van full of bombs getting on the on-ramp of the George Washington Bridge. The Mossad, the Israeli military, or the Israeli government, and the crippling ideology is rotted to the core of Zionism, of hate, supremacy, of not people even of the Jewish faith, but just by this Jewish blood that they speak of. And a lot of Jews don't even believe in the Zionist ideology. They obviously don't represent all Jews. But they have taken the name of Judaism and made it one with they're trying to make the name of Judaism one with their country. And it's like what I've heard, a very spot-on quote is that they take Jews as human shields. And what does that mean? Is that ultimately is that a lot of Jews that have no part in the Zionist mess, a lot of Jews that are actually opposed to the Zionist mess, face legitimate hate and anger and frustration and confusion around the world about what the Zionists have done to the Palestinians and in the Middle East. And it gets directed towards some Jews that have no part of it. They are the ones that have used human shields, and they fund people that actually do use human shields. But they use human shields in their information war. Political Zionism, however, it's like when you start going into the deeper aspects of the conspiracy, Alex Jones shuts you down. Start talking on a show about that. Calls you a hater, calls you a bigot, and all that. Or not, you won't say probably bigot. He'll probably call you, he'll say a Jew hater. Or these people that spend their entire lives hating on Jews, and the people, he didn't even say anything about all Jews. Talk about the Zionists. Alex Jones. I think he staged one caller, possibly, but there's one caller that's infamous. He has on there, there's a big YouTube video that says Alex Jones shuts down anti-Semitic caller. And this caller is by all the cliches of the typical anti-Jewish guy. He starts saying about his idols, Henry Ford. How many people even, that's kind of rare. And then he starts going on to the fact about, you're saying all the typical stuff that somebody that doesn't like Jews in general, not just Zionists, but say. And then he says, when he asks, do you think Jews need to be done away with? He says, yes. Now, the way he presented the argument seemed scripted. And I think that Alex Jones might have done that in order to create this false establishment between anti-Zionist and anti-Jewish people. The Alex Jones became slowly, he wasn't as bad before, a shill for the alt-right practically at this point. And he has called, he's called for people to vote for Trump. He used to say how a voting game was rigged and there was no point in voting because it's rigged, the New World Order picks the president. Now he's saying that Trump is going to fight the New World Order or something like that. Trump is owned by Zionist interests. Trump said that he's going to do pretty much everything, that he's going to counter Iran, a country that doesn't have a Rothschild bank. He doesn't really say anything different about Syria, that I guess we're going to continue our war in Syria, and I guess we're going to continue interfering with the legitimate government of Assad, and that they don't have a Rothschild bank. Trump is no different from Hillary Clinton, ultimately, on the major issues. And then you see the scripted debate, and this whole, and what's the thing is that, like what I thought was going to happen, is that Trump, over the course of these debates, especially on the first debate, was going to make himself look bad in order for everybody to be satisfied with Clinton to be the final choice by the elite in order to move on to the next plan in the United States, which is War 3 and martial law. Trump lost his cool towards the end of the debate. Holds up the debate for 5 minutes and doesn't really answer the question. And Trump, he ultimately, he had no, I don't think he had any true intentions of becoming the president. I think that he is just enjoying the publicity stunt that this election is. And he was completely different just a few years ago on practically every major issue he talks about. From immigration, I believe he was different on. He was different on health care, on all kinds of stuff. He came across as more like a as I guess in this whole game as a Democrat rather than a Republican. They're going to make it. Trump seemed like such a buffoon and such a racist by the end of this election that the majority of Americans will be satisfied with Clinton being the president, not realizing the huge ramifications it is for the future of the United States. I talk quite a bit, with a lot of just normal people that don't really know what's going on. They just look at the mainstream media and unfortunately are still blinded. And the consensus is, they're both, a lot of it is, they're both bad, but Clinton is not as bad. I think Trump would push the red button. They're both going to do war, and they're both is going to do martial law. And martial law is pretty close, I would think. Just by the how this country, to make it seem like we're in like the state of emergency. We have the massive riots going on, these race-related protests. These big, these big events, that are like in Charlotte, this kind of the fabric. It seems that the fabric of this country is getting torn apart. How divided we are with the big clashes between Black Lives Matter and the anti-Black Lives Matter crowd inside of the here inside the United States, and it seems like they're trying to foment a race war, and that'd be the perfect excuse for martial law. Is a race war. Because at that point, Americans would be scared, and I think what's happening is that they're realizing a race war is much harder to foment in this country, because ultimately, and I'll say this, is that within the people of the United States, not the government, not the police, but within the people of the United States, the average person is probably less racist than most countries on the planet. Definitely less racist than most Europeans, and definitely less racist than Colombia and many Latin countries even. The average person sees black people, average white person sees black people, a lot of them don't even notice color. The problem is that it's in the system, and a lot of our elected officials, as we saw, three congressmen belong to the KKK. And then it's in our police system, and in our military. As we saw the infamous picture before of over there in Afghanistan, looks a platoon, maybe, or a squad of men were, I think it was a platoon, had a United States flag, and then below it, an SS flag, as in the Nazi SS. There's a lot of that in the military, neo-Nazi beliefs, and I believe it allows them to commit a lot of the psychotic actions that you have to be psychotic to do over there in the Middle East. And people will hate on me and say that I'm talking shit about the troops. I'm talking shit about the attitudes that lead to these psychotic troops. Not all the troops over there are psychotic, but they're definitely they're not on a good mission. Maybe they believe they're on a good mission, but they're not. They're involved with banking is the real reason this war is over there in Iraq and Afghanistan. Opium and oil. But it has nothing to do with freedom, democracy, and fighting terrorism. Terrorism continues to bloom with the United States presence across the Middle East. In Syria, in eastern Syria, ISIS continues to flourish, with the United States supposedly doing a bunch of strikes against them. The United States is supposedly striking them all the time, but in all reality, it's like just a few strikes a day, and they're not even targeted towards the Syrian terrorists. They're not targeted to. They say they're targeting ISIS, but what happened on September 17th? Deir el-Zor happened. which is now I saw the death toll. I kept saying 83. I saw the death toll as 90 minimum, with the Syrian media outlet saying 106. I believe the Syrian media. I'm going to say it's 106. 106 Syrian troops died because of the United States interference that day. And people say, well, they were Assad's goons anyways. Who cares? That's where you're wrong. The Syrian soldiers are fighting a lot of times to protect their country from this, and they are successfully countering a foreign mercenary rebellion, supposedly. Supposedly this is a revolution, but these people belong to 83 different countries, and a lot of them not Syria. And these people are committing acts of terror on the streets. They're using chemical weapons, at least as have been alleged they're using chemical weapons against the Syrian people. And they have went to long lengths to try to bring in foreign United States into the country in order to intervene, like what they did, or at least collaborate with Saudi Arabia doing this. And they've collaborated with to try to bring in the United States into the country. Remember, it was in 2013, the supposed attacks on Damascus by the Syrian government, they said. But the truth was that these chemical weapons that were used in Damascus, there was no chemical weapons used in Damascus. This was a movie crew brought in by Saudi Arabia, a Hollywood-style movie crew, in order to fake these attacks, in order to make it appear that they have been attacked. The truth was that it was a lot of the images also that were shown were from actually United States, where the United States was in Baghdad, 2003. But they faked the supposed chemical weapon attack, and there's no evidence that's been brought up. There's no evidence to have shown that the Assad regime used chemical weapons. But there is evidence for sure that the Syrian rebels have used chemical weapons. The Syrian rebels they're terrorists. And the United States attacked these Syrian troops at Deir al-Zor, protecting their country from ISIS. And they allowed ISIS to make an advance. ISIS, right after the attack, moved forward, and this is near the airport in Deir al-Zor. I mean, I would hate to see what would happen with an airport, with the airport there under siege in this major city. This is like the only outpost of the Syrian government out there. They're protecting the city of about 300,000 people. And then imagine if they were to take big parts of the city over and then take over the city, and that's the last, this another city under hostage like Raqqa by ISIS over there. And the United States put them one step closer to being able to do that. It's infuriating to people that actually care what's going on over there. And ISIS benefiting from this attack. Now they put them behind the Syrian army on the fight against them. Now the Syrian army has been, they were attacked. A lot of these people, just normal men, that joined the fight against these mercenaries, the fight to protect their families, protect their homeland, and just protect their country. And they were killed. And no one cares that these 106 men were killed. 106. Now imagine if 106 Americans were killed over in, let's say in Iran. By the, let's say that the United States military, or actually no, that's not comparable. Let's say the United States military, 106 of them, fighting we'll just say some militia or something like that. Or yeah, let's say that, even though that's not really comparable, but not necessarily. But we'll just say that. Let's say during the Bundy militia incident, that 106 American troops were there, and that the Russian military said, or the Russian government thought, okay, I've seen enough of this. This is ridiculous. What the federal standoff they're having with these ranchers. This is tyranny at its finest. Now let's go and attack the United States military, and we're going to let these Bundy boys free. The United States military comes over, the Russian military comes over and bombs the United States on United States soil, United States military. And obviously, it's not comparable because Bundy militia, the United States military is ultimately a bigger threat to our country than the Bundy militia. Literally protecting their land, but the Bundy ranchers then are freed out of there. They take over. They continue to control the Bureau of Land Management office, and they then later, let's say they now take over the town or something like that, or try to take over the town after that. The United States military would be so close to declaring war on Russia that they wouldn't even be able to say, the Russian wouldn't even be able to say it was an accident. Because that ultimately was that's what the United States military said in the end. It was an accident. How many times have they said that? We didn't mean to do that. It was an accident. We didn't mean to do that. That was an accident. Syria is infuriating. The Syrian situation is infuriating, and the lack of care that the lack of amount of attention that Americans put up into it. The rogue state term that is used so much by the media, though, definitely, and also the United States doesn't really, if you really think about it, by the amount of people, let's go by not the governments that are under the influence of the United States or Israel, but let's look at the peoples of the world, is that the United States government is one of the most despised entities around the world by the populations. From European countries to Latin American countries, Asian countries, African countries, the United States government is despised around the world. It does not have many allies as the people of around the world. And the United States government has way more characteristics of being called a rogue state than any of these other countries are being called rogue states. It's a term of no meaning. It's an ad hominem attack. It's a term of no meaning. Used to attack these countries that pose a threat to the United States Israeli agenda. And the United States has also helped out with, there's the kind of crazy stuff that the United States has been involved in. Let's look at Pol Pot over there in Cambodia. Is that, you think there'd be absolutely no reason that the United States would back such a brutal dictator that was so ultra-nationalistic and had no, was obviously had no, probably, of course, was not thinking even remotely about probably the United States' interest, besides if they can help him or not. And Pol Pot was backed by Mao in the United States. It was a splinter faction of the Laos Socialist Party there. And the Laos Socialist Party looked like they were going to take charge after the kingdom of Laos fell apart. And in the end, there was a coup and all that. A lot of stuff went down, and this ultra-nationalist faction of the party found its way into power, and Pol Pot became the leader of the country. After that, 2 million Cambodians were killed out of a country, or more than 2 million. I think it was like 3 million were killed in a country, or it was 2 million were killed in a country that only has 7 million people at the time. So more than a quarter of the people of Cambodia are killed by the Pol Pot regime in a matter of only 2 years. The reasons why literally sometimes that they had glasses and they killed anybody that was educated. There was the killings were so indiscriminate. And then in the later years, it's alleged that the United States aided his elusion from capture. He actually never was captured. He died in 1998, many years after the crimes. And it said that the last thing he was listening to was Voice of America, which is the United States propaganda radio that is spread across the world in many different countries, presenting America as the shining city on the hill, and promoting pretty much like the idea of what like the ultra extreme of American propaganda, of what America's almost the extent of where people used to think because of the pro-American government's propaganda, probably in South Korea, people used to believe that the streets in the United States were paved with gold. That's how backwards these people were to actually believe there was such a place, and how brainwashed they were to believe that the United States is such a beautiful country. And they didn't know anything about and I noticed that's one thing about foreigners a lot of times that are here. They have no idea of the underbelly of this country, or the fact that 50% of this country is in poverty. We have 80% are living, if they lost their next paycheck, they would go homeless. We have the amount of people that are living on $2 or less a day. This is a very third world statistic right here. But the amount of people that are living on that amount or less has skyrocketed since 1996. 4 times more people are living on $2 or less a day, and that's pretty much just homeless people that's mentioning. A lot of these people are having to thrift or go through trash, or maybe find a soup kitchen in order to eat. And I would say, these people are struggling to eat. That is abstract poverty. America is now starting to see these people. That's really what the statistic shows, is that the amount of people that are now being, this is something that used to not even really touch Americans at one point in this country. Poverty was a different story, but there's always been poverty in this country, and there's always poverty in every country, I would think. Maybe smaller, definitely way smaller amounts in some countries, but way smaller amounts in some countries, but the abstract poverty wasn't too much. That's something that really is not an American issue, and it's still not. At least that's what people think. But ultimately, there is this looming prospect of abstract poverty becoming a major issue in the United States, especially if there is a monetary collapse that would affect a lot of people in this country, and that would bring this country down to levels of a third world country, at least for a while. There's chaos and all kinds of people. There would be runs for grocery stores. There would be the disaster type scenarios that monetary collapse would be for this country would be huge. And I think even just a restructuring of the dollar would be a major disaster. And that's possible. It's, a restructure meaning like the Federal Reserve now include Canada and Mexico into it, and restructure it to become the North American dollar, or the Amero dollar. It's been talked about for many years. The Amero dollar has been mentioned since like 2005 was the first mentions of the Amero dollar. And since then, we've heard it on and off. But I think that we're getting closer to it. That the Amero dollar will be probably that'll be the currency that'll be coming up after the martial law and all that to take place, maybe towards the end of the decade or into the next decade. It will be brought about. I think it'll be towards the end of this decade. It'll be probably the Amero dollar will be brought about. Of course, it's all speculation when I say stuff like that. I mean, I don't know the future, but what I've seen on the time track stuff taking place, that's what I think is going to happen. But, on my prediction of martial law coming to the United States May next year comes from the fact that the false flag that would trigger martial law has been hinted by Netanyahu and Cheney, not to be too far away, And then Netanyahu even gave us sort of a timetable. That timetable being that he said in 2013 that an attack on New York was going to happen in 3 to 4 years. And he didn't really say, like, if we didn't do this or this or that, just that he said that's when he believed there would probably be another attack on New York. Now, that attack on New York being 3 to 4 years away in 2013, well, 3 years, that's this year, and 4 years is next year. I'm sure by how it seems like things have been spread out. You know, there was the alarmist that was saying back in 2013 that martial law was coming that year. Now, I think that we should just look at the words from the horse's mouth, being Netanyahu's mouth, which he's, you know, ultimately Netanyahu is, out of all these elected figureheads, is probably the most powerful one in the world, besides the sovereign leaders. But the only people above him are, you know, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and all that. Netanyahu's, like I said, Israel is closer to the top than the United States is when it comes to the whole New World Order power, you know, structure. New World Order level of power. Netanyahu is in Israel is at a higher step than the United States, and we've seen this. For example, the fact is how they have to treat the United States spies of Israel here in the United States, like what happened with the what was his name? I think it was Kevin Pollard, the one that the spy that was here in the United States that they had to let go. And, you know, and then we saw the 60 Israeli, 60 Mossad that were arrested after 9/11. And the fact is that they were let go so quickly. They were just a few months later, they all went back home to Israel. So if you just look at the ways, and then you see people that were not spies, but were accused of being spies or something like that. The Cuban Five, they were in jail for what, like 40 years? I don't know actually too much about the Cuban Five, but I know they were there for a ridiculous amount of time, and this year they were let go, finally. But, you know, you see that these people that were involved with probably major breaches of our security, or at least allegedly. They probably were just handed over the information by the United States government. I mean, the fact that the point of even spying, you know, between the United States of Israel even spying on the United States government is probably almost mute, because ultimately they know everything about the United States government they need to know, because they give a lot of the orders are coming from the Israeli government to the United States government. We are right now we got about 42 minutes left of the show. Haven't checked the chat room yet. I wish I had the call set up, because definitely would be able to be nice to have some, you know, have the fans of the show contribute a little bit, make a call, ask some questions or whatnot. But breaking down also is that the rogue state term was also applied to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Now, Hugo Chavez had many, many allies, and he had many people around the world that loved him. His people loved him. And he definitely was not unpredictable. He was unpredictable maybe with his words that he said. And calling, for example, "Damn you, Yankees." Or yeah, he actually said, when he said, "Váyanse Yankees, Yankees de mierda." He's the saying, and then, but he said, yeah, "Damn you, Yankees," or "Damn you, shit, Yankees." That's what he said about the United States ambassador that had been recently accused of interfering with the sovereignty, or they kicked them out for having the United States Embassy in Bolivia having interfered with the affairs of Bolivia. I think that they made a good step there, and I think that they ultimately the United States embassy should be closed down in Caracas because they've caused nothing but trouble since they've been there. The United States embassy, it's like there was one time, I believe it was I saw it today, something about that the Cuban current ambassador to Cuba by the United States said that when asked why do you think that Castro hasn't fallen or there hasn't been a color revolution, why hasn't there been a color revolution in Cuba yet? It's because there's no United States embassy there. And that's the same thing that goes along with Venezuela, is that there's been all these protests recently. And I'll say it right here. I don't care, I don't care about my defense of the Bolivarian Revolution will continue because I see through the lies that have been perpetuated, especially what people down there are talking to, and they're telling me a much different account from what the mainstream media is. I love the fact that we people in the it is the corroding and it's the infiltration partially, the alt-right coming in. That's been one of the people that's been pushing a lot of these completely false stories about Venezuela have been the alt-right. And they say that there's all this apocalyptic scene of people trying to get the last food from the grocery stores. They're saying that there's all these riots going on, that there's this and this happening. They're saying that it's possible to get oil in an oil-rich country. But in reality, or that there's shortages of oil. They're saying all kinds of stuff. But in reality, a lot of these stories have been complete farces or exaggerated. Yes, there's been somewhat of a shortage of food just because of the fact that there's been a regional drought on the economies. Because both Colombia and Venezuela economies rely a lot on oil. And when the Saudis pretty much declared an economic war on Venezuela, because the Venezuelans were taking away a lot of their clients with their cheaper oil, well, the Saudis decided, we'll just go cheap. And they wanted to run the Venezuelans out of business, not just get more money. This already oil-rich state wanted to completely eliminate their competitors. And they kept going, and they dropped it down. Now it was down at one point to like $27 a barrel, and it's still pretty low. And at one point, Venezuela at one point was selling $50 a barrel, while the rest of the world was selling $75 or even $100 a barrel. At one point, remember, oil reached $108 a barrel. The Venezuelan government has been also attacked by sanctions caused by the United States wanting to attack Venezuela because they don't have a Rothschild bank. Venezuela has been the major target of many crippling sanctions, allowing only a few countries that are willing to break through these sanctions to trade with them. And it's almost led to like a Cuban-style embargo on the Venezuelans. And that's what they did for many years. And yes, there were some struggles at times, but they did make it through. The Venezuelans also are not in this apocalyptic scene fighting for the last amounts of food. There's quite a bit of food in many places. And the person I was talking to is not even in Caracas or anything like that. He's actually in Valera. And usually when these shortages happen, usually the cities are provided for first, and then a lot of times the country places have to suffer from the shortages. Valera, which is kind of close to Maracaibo, I think is a perfect example of a place that what it sounded like they were doing fine there. There's some shortages, sure, but does their crisis even get close to what the Colombian crisis that's not being talked about? The alt-right will never mention the inconvenient Colombian crisis, where 8 times that's how much food prices have skyrocketed under the current economic system they have in Colombia. And there's all people have to go to these extreme lengths. There's a lot of people buying up the food in Colombia. And what they do is that they hoard up the food and then maybe they sell it for a little bit lower price, or they give it for certain favors, and they practically run as a criminal cartel of food. And it said, like, for example, these richer people will buy up food, and then, to get for a poor person to get their hands on the food, maybe they have to have sex with this richer man. The Colombian situation has also gotten worse. The last year, really, it was a very quick jump, this inflation that they had. That they went from, for example, the Colombian peso. It took 2,700 Colombian pesos to get $1 last fall. In the winter of 2016, now it took 3,300 Colombian pesos for $1. So the amount of inflation that is equivalent to that happened in just about 2 months period we're talking about here is about, let's see, I think I calculated it's also like 20% approximately. So 20% inflation in 2 months is pretty bad. And that's almost, it did not go much further than that. So I guess it didn't turn into hyperinflation. But what did happen was a mass sell-off of a lot of stuff, and including one of their major, the Easter controversy that happened there. And that was a sell-off, I think it was their, Easter bought up a lot of their water, I think what the deal was. And I know that the water is being privatized now. Rather, it used to be, or what has been for many years, state-owned, and now it's going to become privatized and sold off to private corporations. And, a lot of people champion the supposed successes inside of Pinochet's Chile, saying that when everything was privatized, everything was good in Pinochet's Chile. That is despicable, the fact that the alt-right loves Pinochet. He was a murderer. These same people that are scared, they talk about how the black van's here in the United States coming. Well, how the black van term even came out to be? Was from Pinochet. And also the black helicopters. They're joking about how they want to throw commies out of helicopters, but at the same time talking about how the black helicopters are coming for us and you're in the United States government. Both those things were generally brought about from the black helicopters and the black vans. Those were both Pinochet's tactics. Yeah, he did. Mainly took you out in the black van and disappeared you out in the woods, but I think there was some more publicized incidences where, and these were people that were dissidents, higher level dissidents in the country against his regime. Yeah, they got thrown out of helicopters. But they'd be joking about it all the time and joking about these people that, it's like, it's a very contrary to what they preach about, what they say they're about, small government, when the Pinochet government was huge and had a lot of people that were just there literally to kill dissidents. Pinochet's government was also backed by the United States government. When they talk about how they dislike the United States government and they believe that it's been corrupt for a long time, well, guess who backed the government that you like was backed by that corrupt government that you say you don't like. They also a lot of times conflict themselves and say stuff like, "I'll be glad that we have what we have here in the United States," but at the same time talk about how horrible it is and how we're becoming socialist, but at the same time say, "Oh no, we are capitalist and that's why everything's great." They conflict themselves so many times, and the alt-right, and why I have to say this about that? Because the mainstream media is using them against us, because they're just an extension of the mainstream. They're an extension. The alt-right it's like the same thing as the social justice warrior, but they're just the flip side of it. The social justice warrior is another side of this coin of internet shit spewing. And it's like a big shitty mess that they're just making all over the all over the shitty part of the internet that they belong on. The social justice warriors and all writers can go at it all day about pointless issues, while us people that are truly alternative media are going to point out the mainstream media, and we're going to continue focusing on Syria. What happened at Deir el-Zor, where 106 Syrian soldiers were killed recently. In fact, that more civilians were targeted inside of Syria by the United States military. That's what the fuck we're focusing on. We're not going to focus on, and we're not going to joke about war crimes committed. Also, who was big part responsible? I'll tell you, who was a big part responsible for Pinochet coming to power. It was Henry Kissinger. So is that who you want to support? You want to support Henry Kissinger, also the one that was behind big time the bombings inside of heavily populated areas inside of North Vietnam? You want to be also behind that? You also was the one that backed using sarin gas inside of Vietnam. He's the one that was been behind a lot of the United States government's most ugliest actions over the years. And he was behind also the coup in Chile on September 11th, 1973, which I think is because the elite have some kind of fixation on the date 9/11, and that's why that they done the horrors that they did on the coup on 9/11, 1973, and they did the horrors of 9/11, 2001, and Pinochet was alive for both of them. It became the power in 1973. And in 2001, was still alive and in exile because he didn't face justice. He lived a complete life, in part from the UK, I believe, is where he spent a lot of his last years in. And the UK, was Margaret Thatcher, whose policies led to many people being killed in the Third World with their Cold War policies, and escalating the Argentinian UK war over the Falklands. She was big time behind. I'm pretty sure she was supported just like Reagan, the Mujahideen getting funded, who turned out to be the Taliban and Al Qaeda. But no, just completely ignore this complete hypocrisy that's coming from some of these people. Joking about fucking black helicopter or people getting kicked out of helicopters. These dissidents, some of the most horrific. This is some of the worst parts of Operation Condor, right there. It's like, what? There are people on the other side. A lot of people, some of their enemies, like the Stalinists, that do the same ugly shit about like the gulags, joking about sending people to gulags. And this is one of the worst parts of the Stalin era oppression by Joseph Stalin. That's sick. But so is joking about, and that's not just sick, but very sick. The same thing about the throwing people out. Talk about throwing out commies out of helicopters. That's also very sick. I'm going to check out the chat room just to see what kind of buzz I might have stirred up. Since I haven't checked it, I want to check it before the show ends. We are already 1 hour and 30 minutes plus into the show. I'm going to probably do something towards the end a little bit special. I want to talk about one of these rogue states in particular. People that listened to me a long time know I'm a fan of this so-called dictator that was there for 42 years. Big time fan, absolutely. As he stood up for his people against the New World Order, against the Israeli United States agenda to tear apart his country. And he was successful in 85 of deterring it. Now, I hope this is not a repeat of 2011. What's happened here in Syria is that because they were unsuccessful in the 80s to take out the Assad regime and take out Hafez al-Assad, that they're going to try extra hard in 2016 now to take out Bashar al-Assad. It's like the United States government doesn't quit. They just come back 25 years later. And this is actually now more like 35 years later. This is about 1982. The 85 Libya intervention killed one of Gaddafi's sons. And the 2000 intervention killed Gaddafi and a few of his sons. There's other sons. There's only like a couple living Gaddafis now. I think his wife lived and ran out of the country. And let's see, I'm just looking at the chat room. Just get out of the chat room and see what's going on. Yeah, and John Titor was agreeing with me here about it's a joke to say that Obama is anti-Zionist, but that's what these people at Breitbart and other, I've seen alt-right, these ultra-conservative pages and stuff like that have claimed that Obama is some kind of secretly wants to destroy Israel and stuff like that. Like, I saw the same thing along with, there was this page about Bernie Sanders saying that was the plan of, that Bernie Sanders is going to come to power or something. If Bernie Sanders was to come to power, he's a closet Stalinist, and Stalinists have no connection to Israel whatsoever, and they actually he was going to destroy Israel. I'm like, what? Bernie Sanders is the one who defended Israel, and he told those people that were shouting in favor of Palestine to shut up. I'm talking. You're going to tell me that guy also that said about the 2014 murder of 2,000 Palestinians that were 80% non-combatants? You're going to tell me that guy was, and he said that was just, and this is what he had to say, is that, they were just, what did he say? He said that they might have overreacted a little bit. That's a very big under-exaggeration of what happened. They didn't overreact a little bit. They just committed flat-out genocide against the Palestinians that month. So in 2001 months there. That's what I'm saying. And John Pritchard from what you heard what I said earlier, is that alt-right is a joke like the social justice warriors, and they're like brand new inventions of the internet. I didn't even see these kind of, social justice warriors thing is about 3 years old at most. They came out in 2013. And they both, the predecessors, the beginnings of these ideologies came about a bit earlier, but they've been pieced together into a coherent ideology now. But they're both rather incoherent to reality. But as an ideology that actually can be named now, and actually they believes in some stuff or whatever as became recent. And it seems like it's literally with this election they've been highlighted with the social justice warriors, a bunch of them on Clinton's side, and then the alt-righters on Trump's side. Well, ultimately they folded into the election farce, and ultimately have shown themselves to not be any bit different from the system. From the Senko Gore guys to the Alex Jones guys, and the Breitbart guys, they just shown themselves to be extensions of the mainstream media. And it's kind of weird. I'm looking at the chat room today, and maybe because I've just put out so much truth out there, it's actually pretty quiet on the chat room today. Just a few people there participating. I got one of my regulars, of course, here, and always nice to see the regulars. Looking back, one new person I see here. But yeah, it's very, this whole election, this whole watching people follow this politics. Not saying that anything's wrong with it. It's like a fucking reality show. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. These are our candidates. And people actually seriously talk about, they're telling me that I'm so wrong because because honestly, that's what I pretty much have said. Almost about this, say this point is just like, I'm just pretty much going to be like the guy that says, I don't give a shit which one gets elected, honestly. Because, no, don't even, just be that guy, the completely apathetic guy to the election. But the truth is that I don't give a shit because it's going to end up the same either way. But Hillary Clinton is the one that's going to win. Honestly, the only thing that it would surprise me, that's it, if Trump won, because I believe that Clinton has definitely been the one that's been chosen to win since the beginning. There's no way that Trump is going to be the one selected. Yeah, and talk about the chat room. It's like when there's not the usual when we don't have like our usual 3-4 in there, they seem to. It seems like it doesn't really bring any other people. They kind of liven up the chat room, don't they? But it's what it is. What it is. We've had a good show, anyways. I'm sure that the people listening to this show have really enjoyed it. Enjoyed my little bit of ranting. Sometimes I feel like Charlie from It's Always Sunny a little bit. I'm starting to, not with the illiteracy or anything like that, of course, but just like how he yells and starts going into his rants and stuff like that. And it's like whenever somebody says something like stupid, like Obama's anti-Zionist, he hates Israel or whatever, I'm like, but Obama supports Israel all the time, dude. He's always giving money over to them. But you can see, imagine if you watch the show, you can imagine how like Charlie would scream it, and it's pretty funny. We got about 20 minutes left of the show only. I got one thing in mind. I'm gonna close off the show, but let's talk about the rogue states. Let's talk about one of the big ones, Gaddafi and Libya. For many years, Gaddafi and Libya was demonized by the mainstream media to be a rogue state. That Libya's unpredictable. They said that they support terrorism. They went on and on about Libya, and but as recently as 2009, Gaddafi came to visit the United States. Remember that? He was, and then he actually stayed in a tent outside of the White House. He wouldn't stay in the White House. I wouldn't stay in the White House either. Screw that. I'd rather camp outside. But that was part of like show's culture, how dedicated his culture. That's why he wore the African robes rather than like a suit and tie. It just showed that he was dedicated culture. Plus, that thing looks fucking comfortable. I mean, people nagged on Gaddafi for wearing that. I mean, it looked like he was like wearing like a silk blanket. I mean, I bet that when it's 130 degrees outside, like it is in Libya, I'd be wearing a fucking silk blanket, whatever. I don't even see how people could wear a suit and tie. Like I've seen, other Libyans. I'm pretty sure I've seen them wear suits and ties there. That place is 130 degrees in summer. It's one of the hottest places in the world. In fact, I think the hottest temperature ever in the world was recorded in Libya. I think it was 139 degrees Fahrenheit, which for our people that are not from the United States and aren't really familiar with Fahrenheit, that's approximately what's that, 50, it's approximately 58 Celsius. That's rough. 139 degrees was once recorded in Libya. And what was Algeria? It's Algeria. I don't think it was it. I think I'm confused now. I'm like trying to think which country, because I knew which country that was. It was the world's hottest temperature ever recorded was. I'm pretty sure it was Libya. But yeah, anyways, besides, people often nagged on Gaddafi for just some eccentric behaviors they participated in. And he definitely was different from a lot of world leaders. Definitely wasn't as formal, and his speeches were from the heart, I would say. They weren't really scripted. Gaddafi was known for his very passionate speeches, and he did some very passionate ones towards the end. And Gaddafi, for many years, had done so many great things for Libya. He had done many, with his projects he'd done seemed like more than any world leader to try to improve the standard of living in his country. Brought it from a country that was just like, it was a third world country, formerly oppressed by the King Idris of Libya, and was very backwards at the time in 1969 when Gaddafi became the leader of the country. And by 2011, it became the most prosperous country in Africa. It became it became a very popular tourist spot for Europeans, and it became a very nice country. And they had brought water out to the most very rural parts of the country. They had done. They had made a currency that was free of the Rothschilds. The Rothschilds were out of the country, and Libya also was about to make the African Union. This is where they wanted to stop them, is that because they didn't want the entire continent to be free of the Rothschilds' control. So in the end, the Rothschilds decided this is time to take out Gaddafi, and they sent NATO and the military of NATO after him. United States. This is Obama. One of Obama's worst moments, right there. One of the worst things that happened during his administration was the killing of Muammar Gaddafi. And Muammar Gaddafi was such a great leader. And I'll say it, he was a great leader. He really cared about his people, and he did so many great things. And the passion that he had for his people, passion he had for his culture. He was right in the footsteps of Nasser. And, Nasser thought him to be, that he was kind of flawed, but Nasser really kind of proved Gaddafi proved Nasser's doubts to be quite wrong, because what he did as a leader and the allies that he made with people around the world, he was one of the most liked leaders around the world. I believe. I think that, especially in third world countries, and that was the thing, is that people have been falsely misled in this country to think that all the actions of the United States military are widely approved of across the world. But in reality, the killing of Muammar Gaddafi is seen as a very terrible thing that the United States military did, especially in South America, where he had a lot of fans, and Africa, the Middle East. He made in some West European countries, and the United States, they approved of it, but I can tell you that in South America, they did not really approve of it. And it seemed barbaric, because it was barbaric, how they treated Gaddafi once he was captured. Look at what they did. They tortured him, and then they put his suffering on video, and in the end, they buried him some remote location, and I don't think anyone can find it. They gave him almost like Gaddafi fought to the end like Che Guevara. They killed him like Che Guevara. But Che Guevara wasn't even tortured towards the end. He was held captive, and then he just shot him a few times. Gaddafi was stabbed in many places, and then they pretty much left him to bleed out, and they put that suffering on video. And the people that captured Gaddafi, I remember watching a special from Anthony Bourdain, went over there to Libya and saw post-Gaddafi Libya, and they were talking about the Libyan civil war, and these people that were these Libyan rebels, they sounded even on this show where they're going to be shown to be more humane than they actually are. And it's pretty much just a propaganda show to make it seem like the post-Gaddafi Libya is better. This former Libyan rebel was saying that how he capped his shirt with Gaddafi's blood on it to this day. And these people just had such barbaric attitudes. And there was literally one guy, and I shit you not, this is what he said. They were in a fast food place. It was like a knockoff of KFC. And he says, biting down into a chicken leg, that, you see this right here? This is the taste of freedom. So this is what we fought for the taste of freedom. So you fought to bring fried chicken to your country. Is that what you're saying? Is that how shallow your movement was? And ultimately, that's a lie. That it was about democracy, or it was about bringing American stuff over in a way. What it was ultimately was an Islamist uprising, just like what's happening in Syria today. Terrorists, mercenaries, foreign mercenaries, and terrorists being imported from other countries in order to destabilize the country, and for the United States government to now influence Libya. That's what it was about. It was about the removal of a leader that posed a roadblock to the New World Order in a major roadblock because he's going to liberate Africa once and for all from colonialism after so many years of them suffering through colonialism. These brutal stories from King Leopold II, what he did in the Zaire or the Congo. You hear what Cecil Rhodes did to Zimbabwe. You hear all these stories, and they named this country after he had mass murdered the people of Zimbabwe. They took away their customs and named it after this horrible man, Rhodesia. The Rhodes Scholarship is named after Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes, the man that killed as many people as Hitler. You don't even hear about him in our textbooks because he killed Africans. And apparently the African lives don't matter, according to our textbooks. And Cecil Rhodes, to the King Leopold II, these horrible men that killed as many people as Adolf Hitler. King Leopold II, I mean, the estimates, it's at least 10 million people that King Leopold killed. 10 million people he killed in the Congo. The conditions he put them through during that time was absolutely horrendous. And Gaddafi, this was the man that could have changed all that. Brought a brighter future for Libya, and the neo-colonialist dictators have done. Like, they brought a neo-colonial dictator after Patrice Lumumba finally had brought independence to his country from the tyrannical Belgian rule over the Congo. They did a coup against them. Those bastards from the CIA got rid of him. They got rid of Patrice Lumumba. They brought about a dictator. Look what they did in Egypt. Brought about the dictator. They don't talk about how nowadays the Mubarak for all that time was backed by the United States government. Mubarak has reigned of terror for 30 years. Mubarak was backed by the United States government. And then they brought about another dictator, Morsi, to Egypt. Look what they did. And they backed King Idris, the dictator of Libya. They backed the apartheid regime in South Africa, and they called Nelson Mandela a terrorist. And now they're going to act like, and you heard this, gaff, that's the right word, right, for this, is that Nelson Mandela, the man that was very much pro-Palestinian and compared the struggles of the black South African to the struggles of the Palestinian. He saw solidarity in the Palestinian movement because their movements were so similar between the Palestinian and the black South African trying to get equality in South Africa. And you saw that Obama over there, they made the biggest disgrace to the name of Nelson Mandela, saying that he compared Shimon Peres to Nelson Mandela. That right there is disgrace. A man that the South African pro-African movement was very much pro-Palestinian. And at one point, I believe Nelson Mandela said that our movement isn't done until the Palestinian is free. The Palestinian being these people that have been victimized for the last 70 years, and at that point it was only 50-something years, and it continues. And Nelson Mandela never reversed his stance really on Israel. And I think later years he wasn't as radical as he was beginning. And I think that Nelson Mandela might have moderated over the years, especially as he got much older. He definitely didn't stay as hardcore as Robert Mugabe. He's still the president of his country now. So, I saw people talking shit about Mugabe, but I remember that, I actually talked with an actual Zimbabwean. And she was telling me about in person. She was telling me that, yes, actually, white tourists are treated very well inside the country. Hey, why is my tablet shutting off right now? Oh, crap, not this. I don't know. At least that's what it's... Hey, sorry about that, everyone. My disconnected there for a couple minutes by accident.
Point of no return and nobody can stop it. Malcolm Little when he knelt before Elijah Muhammad, the comet that killed the dinosaurs, changing the earth. They love to criticize, they always say I changed for the worse. Like prescription pills when you misusing them, nigga. The Templar Knights when they took Jerusalem, nigga, and figured out what was buried under Solomon's temple. Al-Aqsa, the name is not coincidental. I know too much, the government is trying to murder me. No coming back like cutting your wrists open vertically. How could the serpent be purposely put in charge of the country? Genetic engineered sickness spread amongst me. My people are so hungry that they attack without reason, like a fucking dog ripping off the hand that feeds them. Immortal technique is treason to the Patriot Act. So come and get me, motherfucker, cause I'm not coming back. This is the point from which I can never return, and if I back down now, then forever.